Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining me today on August 25th for our monthly Lunch and Learn that happens on the last Tuesday of every month. This month we are joined by the Environmental Integrity Project with Lisa and Courtney, both coming in today to talk about the data centers and the gas power plants that are coming with them to power them. So I'm going to throw it over to the Environmental Integrity Project and have them get started.
Thank you, Kyle. So happy to be here with everybody. Thanks for joining. My name's Lisa Graves-Marcucci, and I am the Pennsylvania Coordinator of Community Outreach for the Environmental Integrity Project. And joining me is my colleague, Courtney Bernhardt, who is the director of our research team, doing an awesome job. She's going to be sharing some information about our new report about behind the meter gas plants, which is what we're seeing as part of the ever-changing landscape associated with data centers. So I have been working with the shale gas field communities and Protect PT for many years. And we have been working to try to get protections in place for the communities that live near the fracked well pads and all the infrastructure that comes into play as the shale gas development increases in Pennsylvania. What we've noticed recently is there is a direct correlation between the data centers that are being proposed and fracking, and the fact that they are looking to bring their own energy sources to some of these data centers. That could potentially mean more fracking for already burdened communities, and it could also mean new fracking in areas that have not yet seen it. So if you can go to the next slide, Courtney. One of the things that I was really astounded, I just was sent this article about a week ago, and this is from a community in Northampton County, Pennsylvania, a small community called Upper Mount Bethel Township. And in their community, Talon Energy is partnered with other companies to put a partnership together called Slate Belt Holdings. And they are looking to put in a data center campus. And I understand that there has been some pushback, like in so many communities, where folks are asking questions. They're not sure that's a good fit for their community. And we just found out just earlier this month that the data center operator, developer, and soon to be operator, offered this particular community $50 million to build the campus. And I included the link there that if you want to click on that and read the full article, you can see where it was, they wanted them to sign a memorandum of understanding to allow them to come into the community. They were going to make a commitment if the data centers produced so much analytical power, then they would reap these financial benefits. So if you can go to the next slide. So when I see something like that, I have to ask myself, could large sums of money potentially being promised to communities affect the application review and the approval process? Is this something that the data center is feeling the pushback from community members saying this is not a good fit for our community? They're going to potentially turn to some financial promises, and this is the first time I've seen this example, so I don't know the answer to that. I think a lot of what we're talking about today is unanswered questions, and that's one of them. One of the other unanswered questions that I have is how might the governor's recent executive order affect the data center development? And if you go to the next slide. So in the executive order, I can't help but wonder if the executive order language helps or confuses things further. For example, we know that we're still diving into this. Our teams and a number of our partner organizations are still investigating all of the terms of the executive order and what that might mean in real time in real communities. But in particular for me, I question this develop their own power, generate their own power language. And is that in fact going to mean more gas-powered power plants as the energy source for these data centers as they grow? And the other question that I have is the governor's executive order seemingly puts a pause on the DEP's review of these applications until there's a local approval. But what about the projects that have already submitted to the DEP? We know of a couple of them that are already under review from the DEP. Does that mean they will be paused? We don't know. And the other question that I have that we're going to be digging into, hopefully to find some answers, is what about previously signed non-disclosure agreements or NDAs? We know, in fact, the Talon Energy case that I just referenced in that first slide, I know from community members there that they found out that their community board of supervisors did indeed sign non-disclosure agreements, and it came out in the media. So even though the governor has said that he doesn't want there to be non-disclosure agreements, what about the ones that we don't know about or the ones that, have been signed, and how do we find out? So if you go to the next slide. Our friends at Protect PT shared this about the recent executive order, and I think it's very important. If Governor Shapiro allows this to occur, data centers to develop their own power generation, without implementing the increased health protective drilling setback distances that our communities have been advocating for, and that Governor Shapiro himself promoted as a solution to fracking harms in the 43rd statewide grand jury report, the executive order will be in conflict with our constitutional rights and to clean air and pure water. And Jillian Graber, the executive director of Protect PT, points out this very important fact that our teams have been working for years to get protective setback distances from the fracking well pads. And we currently have a petition before the Environmental Quality Board in Harrisburg. We're thinking a decision may be made on that in December. So this is really an important time. If you go to the next slide. That we see this direct correlation between the data centers and the fracking. And again, as Protect PT also pointed out in their press statement, the relationship between data centers and the fracking industry is clear. Protecting residents from data centers' environmental harm means protecting residents from fracking. Until then, our residents' health will continue to foot the bill for the oil and gas and tech industries. So this is an important moment in time where the communities we're working with who are part of that fracking and shale gas development that has really just been overtaking a lot of these small communities in Western Pennsylvania, and the communities that are now facing data centers, we feel as though there's an important convergent point right now where we can all work together to try to get protective areas from both the data centers and the fracking well pads. So that's part of what we're bringing to you today is some discussion about how these things are intertwined. Next slide, please. As I said earlier, currently there appear to be more questions than answers, and including the questions about exactly what develop their own power generation could actually mean for Pennsylvania. And our recent EIP report about this very subject, I'm happy to introduce again my colleague Courtney Bernhardt, and she's going to talk about that report that we released and how we developed it and what it might mean moving forward.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so Lisa mentioned concerns about the recent executive order and whether it may promote more kind of independent gas power development. In kind of in industry speak, they call those behind the meter power plants. And another way to think about it is to say they're off-grid power plants or they're dedicated to a data center. So EIP earlier in July put out a report called The Power Behind AI that profiled and identified 74 behind the meter gas-fired power plants that were being built to serve data centers. Since then, we've identified maybe 30 more. So this is a growing trend, and it's all over the country, but it's most common in Texas. We've got a large number popping up in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. These are areas that have ample supplies of natural gas coming straight out of the ground, and an oil and gas industry that is looking for a user of their product. And the reason these power plants are likely being built in like right on top of these shale formations, that is the source of all this fracked gas, is because it's easier to build a power plant right where it comes out of the ground than building a giant pipeline across a state or several states in order to reach a power plant. So this map shows the locations of the 74 proposed plants. And as I mentioned, there are several more that we could add to this list. And the data for those we publish on oilandgaswatch.org. And you could go there and either download the data or query for your particular area to see what's nearby. So in addition to identifying these plants, we also quantified the greenhouse gas pollution that they could emit. These plants, the 74 that we identified, we estimated could emit at least 662 million tons of greenhouse gases per year. And to put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of adding 140 million cars to the road and having them drive constantly, or adding the industrial output of Australia or France to the world. And that's a non-trivial amount of greenhouse gases. Another way that I like to think about it is like this amount essentially erases all of the greenhouse gas reductions that we've seen from retiring coal plants over the last decade. So this is huge. And in addition to looking at greenhouse gas pollutants, we also looked at potential health harming air pollution. So the 74 plants we estimated could emit up to 159,000 tons of criteria air pollutants. And criteria air pollutants are that's a term that EPA uses to describe them, but those include pollutants like nitrogen oxides, which contribute to ozone and smog formation and also can cause lung damage. Particulate matter, which increases the risk of asthma and heart attacks. We're looking at a 32,500 tons of fine particulates, which are some of the most dangerous forms of soot out there. These plants can also emit large quantities of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and volatile organic compounds, including benzene and others that are not dissimilar from what you would actually see at a fracking site, although the quantities coming out of those massive gas plants are a lot higher. So just something to keep in mind when anyone says bring your own power. Think about the facts. You need to be able to say why that is a false solution. The report also looked at where these plants would be located and the demographics of the communities around them. We found that most of the plants are in communities that are also facing poor health outcomes. 62 of the 70 with known locations were in locations where life expectancy was below the US average. So in places like Mingo County, West Virginia, you're looking at an 11-year difference. So people in Mingo County are already expected to live 11 years less than the average American, which is just mind-boggling. And then we identified 188 schools that are within 3 miles of a proposed plant. And this is particularly concerning because children and adolescents are already more vulnerable to air pollution because of their breathing rates and because of their developing systems and developing brains. But then go and put a massive power plant nearby and you're exposing them to even more pollution. And we also found that about 40% of people that are living within 3 miles are already in low-income households. And that's concerning because these households may have fewer resources available to make decisions that could protect their health, like selling their home and moving, or being able to take time off work in order to go to the doctor, or even participate in some of the permitting processes that are used to get these plants up and running. So I wanted to give a quick overview of what we are seeing in Pennsylvania specifically. To date, we've identified at least 9 behind-the-meter power plants in the state, and they tend to cluster in the shale regions. So the Southwest Pennsylvania area, a few north and very close to Pittsburgh, and then some in the northeast corner of the state. Combined, they could produce about 14.5 gigawatts or 14,561 megawatts of power. And to put that into perspective, that's about 12.4 million homes, or like more than twice the number of homes in Pennsylvania. So just these 9 plants can provide an astounding amount of power that would go directly to data centers, and then the pollution burden would fall on people who live in Pennsylvania. So in total, for air pollution, based on the information we have available at this time, we're estimating 67.7 million tons of greenhouse gases per year, and about 15,000 tons of criteria air pollutants and 206 tons of hazardous air pollutants. I did want to point out that among the hazardous air pollutants, one of the biggest pollutants from these plants is formaldehyde, and formaldehyde is a known carcinogen. If you ever had to dissect a frog or something in high school, you'll probably remember the smell, and that smell was formaldehyde, which was used to preserve the animal. It's pretty gross. And it's a pretty dangerous pollutant at low concentrations. So if folks are looking at communicating the risks of these plants, pay attention to formaldehyde. In Pennsylvania and nationwide, actually all air emission sources of a certain size have to obtain an approval from state agencies or a local agency in order to build a source of air pollution. The good news is that only 2 of these 9 plants have a final plan approval. That's what they call them in Pennsylvania, plan approval in place, and 6 still need to apply for permission to build under the Clean Air Act. So there will be opportunities for communities to weigh in on those permitting processes. At least hopefully there will be. Some may apply as minor sources, and the public participation requirements for those vary from place to place. So, and it's something that the Trump administration is actively trying to weaken. The report also includes several case studies, and one of which was the Homer City Generating Station. That's a 4 gigawatt gas-fired power plant that's being planned at the former site of Pennsylvania's largest coal plant. It's about an hour east of Pittsburgh. Most of the electricity would go toward a data center, and our community partners and other NGOs, including Clean Air Council, Penn Future, Sierra Club, have appealed the air construction permit for this plant. They say that the power plant could emit more greenhouse gases each year than all the cars on Pennsylvania's roads. So there are organizations out there that are fighting these permits. It usually requires really good legal support and technical backup. So there are resources out there to help communities, but just something to keep in mind that this process is not for the faint of heart or folks without the time to dedicate to it. So the report also makes several policy recommendations, and EIP feels strongly that fossil fuels really shouldn't power the technology of the future, and that we shouldn't be pushing data centers forward without the clean future power in place. So they shouldn't be rushed. The permitting approval shouldn't be rushed. There is a lot of rhetoric around like us needing, or the United States needing to beat China in the AI race. And we know there are global and geopolitical dynamics to all of this, but we shouldn't sacrifice our health and our way of living and our quality of life to win an AI race. We are still human at the end of the day. So anyway, let's see. So I'm going to hand it back to Lisa, and happy to answer questions if folks have them. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yeah, thank you, Courtney, for all of that good information. And I think it is hopeful that only 2 of the 9 that we know of have received their final plan approval, and 1 that we know of at least is being challenged. But in the meantime, what else can we do? So I think one of the things that we can all be thinking about is finding ways to support a statewide moratorium to allow local government to adopt the protective ordinances that they need at the time when these data centers really seem to be inundating communities, particularly in Western Pennsylvania. Also working to try to find a way to get the uniform protections through legislation, because, we lived through the shale gas boom, and sadly, it was the proverbial cart before the horse. We allowed the fracking to happen, and now we're trying to put the protections in place almost 2 decades later. I'm hopeful that we're going to use that as a lessons learned and hit the pause button, or work to hit the pause button, so that we can get the protections in place first before we travel too far down the path and put too many people in Pennsylvania's health at risk. We are working, as I mentioned, we have a legal petition before the Environmental Quality Board, and the Pennsylvania DEP is reviewing it as we speak, about increasing the minimum setback distance statewide from the new shale gas well pads, the fracked well pads. And I don't know how much folks might know about this, but currently the state minimum, the floor, is 500 feet, which is woefully inadequate. And we, as part of our petition process, submitted 42 individual peer-reviewed health studies that showed the greater the distance between the fracked well pad and schools, daycares, hospitals, and homes, the greater the distance, the more protective. So we are asking in our petition about increasing that statewide minimum. And we're hoping that we can not only increase the distances there, but hopefully that will have an impact as the data centers are trying to tie themselves to more fracked gas. So if you go to the next slide, please. We have some upcoming actions that we are working with our partners, including Protect PT, who has always been awesome and so on point and right there in the communities helping those who are affected. But there'll be a slide at the end of this with the link so you can see all of this. We have a protective buffers campaign that's currently ongoing, and it is part of the plan to get the support that we need to hopefully convince Governor Shapiro to support that petition that increases the statewide minimum setback distance to 1 kilometer instead of being 500 feet. And again, based on 42 individual peer-reviewed health studies, that 500-foot minimum setback distance was an arbitrary number that folks in Harrisburg decided on. And we know for a fact, after doing lots of research, there was no consultation with health officials, not the Department of Health, not epidemiologists, no one, of any public health background. It was just a number that they thought would work. And 20 years in, we know it's not working. We are going to be having a rally in Harrisburg on October 7th. We'd love to have you sign up to join us. We are also looking for speakers who can speak to the concerns about the fracked well pads being near their home or their children's school or something of a vulnerable population like a hospital or a daycare. And we're also looking for speakers who can talk about the data center and the march through communities in Pennsylvania, looking to really just bring a lot of not only the data centers themselves with some problems that we were concerned about there, but also these standalone gas plants that would be, as Courtney said, behind the meter is the lingo they use, but they would be dedicated to the data centers. So we're looking for speakers about the data centers and the fracked well pads and why increasing distances to protect human health is important. When you visit the link that you'll see on the next slide, you'll be able to see the information about the rally, about our virtual postcard to Governor Shapiro, asking him to support the increased setback distance. And you can also send a text message. Governor Shapiro likes to get text messages. It would be great to have everybody send a message and say, please support our protecting our health by increasing those distances. If you look at the link there, if you click on that, that is our Protective Buffers campaign page. And if you visit that page and look for the Take Action tab, all of what I just described to you, there's a link to how you can get involved in all of that. And it walks you through how you can sign up for things, how you can be part of the rally in Pittsburgh or in Harrisburg, and also sending these virtual messages to the governor. We'd love to have you join us. We're trying to grow the coalition statewide because at the end of the day, the Pennsylvania DEP will issue their report, we're told, at the end of this year. And then the governor will have a decision to make. It will rest with primarily the governor and his environmental quality board as to whether we get those protections. And I'll share with you just one example of why we've had to take this step to actually try to find the legal petition route to get the protections that we think Pennsylvanians deserve. As I mentioned before, the minimum setback distance in the state currently is 500 feet minimum. The communities have always had the power through their local land use ordinances to increase that to whatever distance they felt was protective for their community. Well, about 2 years ago, when Cecil Township in Washington County updated their ordinance after allowing a lot of infrastructure for shale gas development, including fracking, compressor stations, and processing, they felt as though they needed a little bit more distance from the fracked well pads. And so they put in place a 2,500-foot setback distance, which was the exact amount of distance that the governor, when he was the attorney general in Pennsylvania, suggested in the 43rd grand jury report, that the 500-foot be increased to 2,500 feet. 3 days after Cecil Township updated their ordinance to include that increased setback distance, their state senator actually co-sponsored a bill that would penalize communities like Cecil Township for going beyond the 500-foot minimum setback distance. Now, on one hand, the state is allowing, through law, the local government to set their own distances, but when the community in Cecil Township decided to do just that, they were told they were going to be penalized, and they would be reductions in how much money for their shale gas fees that they would get from the state. So it's really disingenuous to say it's a minimum setback distance and then try to penalize the very community when they took those steps to protect their community, which we applauded them for taking those steps. So with that said, that's why we're hoping to get a statewide increased minimum setback distance that would be protective for all communities. And it would set the stage that these communities, after living through some of this, have a right to say health matters and health protections matter. And the best way to do that is to increase the setback distances from these occupied structures and vulnerable populations. So hope that you will join us. You can go to the last slide, Courtney. Hope that you will let us know if you have questions or you want to become involved in this part of the campaign because we'd love to have more people and especially like to be able to join communities that are experiencing fracking and the infrastructure build out for shale gas, as well as data centers, because collectively we can have a bigger difference if we work together. So we do welcome everybody to join us, and we do hope that you will be interested in seeing ways that you might be able to join the coalition. So thank you for having us today. And if you have any questions, we're happy to answer those.
Thank you so much, guys. This was great. One moment, let me get the scene set up. There we go. So yeah, thank you so much for coming in. You guys
Kyle,
probably
you're on
couldn't hear
mute.
me. Yeah, one sec. I recognize that. Where did my Zoom window go? Oh, they can hear me in the live stream at least. I lost my Zoom window. Where'd it go?
I think you're still on mute, Kyle.
Yeah, one moment.
Mhm.
Gotta figure it out. Where'd it go? I lost my Zoom. Okay, well, I lost my mute button, but I know they can still hear me on the live stream. So uh, thank you guys for joining us, and you have a wonderful evening, everybody. Please feel free to drop by protectpt.org/data center as well for more information.
Kyle, we can't hear you. Okay.
I lost my Zoom window. What the heck?